This week's parsha is Parshas Pekudei, which is the final chapter of building the Mishkan. Last week and up until now, we were getting the instructions of how to make it, and then we were preparing, and now in this parsha, all of the parts are made, and they are then brought to Moshe, and then it goes through. Moshe puts all the pieces together. He actually builds the Mishkan itself. And he anoints Aaron as the Kohen Gadol, his sons as the Kohanim, and at the very end, the cloud of Shekhinah appears and stays over the Mishkan. Now, we have been talking about the Mishkan for weeks on end, and every time I open up the Parsha and we're talking about the Mishkan again, I'm fascinated because I keep thinking, how are we still talking about this? Like, I thought we got all of the lessons that there were to get out of the building of the Mishkan, the whole process, and we've been derailed a couple times. We went through the Egal, but we're still talking about the Mishkan. And when I looked into it, here's what I found: is that there is one chapter in the Parsha that talks about the creation of the world. There are 3 chapters that are dedicated to Har Sinai, which is when we received the Torah. There are 11 chapters on Mitzrayim and going through the Galus and the redemption of it all. And we spoke a lot about that, about redemption and Geula, which is Rosh Chodesh is coming, which is a huge, huge topic right now in this time of the year. And after that, we have been talking about the Mishkan, and it's not coincidental that the Mishkan is talked about in the time of the Geula, but there are a total of 13 chapters on the Mishkan. And so there's something very significant here. The setup of the Parshios and of the time that's dedicated to it is here for us. And it answers what I would consider to be one of the most fundamental questions of every single human being. What is my purpose in this world? And there are a couple different answers to that question. The Talmud teaches us that the purpose of the world is to serve the Creator. A more of like a Musar perspective would say that the purpose of our life is to refine our souls. The Zohar says that it's to know God, and a Kabbalistic perspective says that it's to receive God's goodness. That's the purpose of this world. So which one is it, right? Maybe it's all of them, maybe. Or maybe all of these answers are all the same answer, really, at their core and their essence. Maybe they're all speaking to the different aspect of exactly the same answer. The real reason is God's innate desire to simply create. And all of those answers that we just went through, all the different opinions, are all exactly the same answer. That it's just because Hashem wants to create. He wants to create the world. He desires to create us. He desires to create goodness, right? And there's one final answer that I saw, which, if there are options, here's another option. Perhaps the purpose of all of it is for us to make a home for God in this material world. Because when we talked about the creation of the world, it was very, very small amount of real estate in the Torah. When we talk about Har Sinai, it gets a little bit bigger. And then when we talk about redemption, it's a little bigger, but there's no topic that is discussed at such great length over and over and over again other than the Mishkan. And so it has to be that that's a very significant part of our purpose in the world. The Torah is our guidebook, and our instructions on how to live a Torah life. A Torah is a guidebook for the creation that God created of us for existing in this world. And so this has to be an important part of it. So let's talk about what it means to create a home for God. What does it mean to create a home? Because God is everywhere. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. He exists everywhere. So Hashem doesn't need our help in existing everywhere. But existing somewhere is very different than being at home. Being at home is not the same. We can be in many places in the world and never truly feel at home. We can live in this world actually in our own bodies and not feel at home in our own body that houses our soul. So we can live in a town that doesn't feel like home. We can be in a relationship that doesn't feel like home. We could be in a job that is the furthest thing from home, right? And on the flip side, you can meet somebody and you instantly feel like you're at home with them. I just met someone this past Shabbos who said when she met her husband, she instantly felt like she was at home. You can walk into a strange city and feel that feeling of being at home. So is home a physical space? Maybe not so much. It's not just the house that you live in. You can be in a state of flow within your work and living in such a state of flow that while you're working particularly, you might feel right at home. And in your body, you can create a tremendous amount of safety and security and peace inside of your body and welcome yourself home into your body, right? So what is this feeling of being home? If we have to define it, I looked up Merriam-Webster, and there are no less than 6 definitions of home, and that's just in the noun category. And I'll list them for you. What's the definition of home? Number 1, one's place of residence, a house. Number 2, a social unit formed by family living together. Okay, so we're getting a little bit more well-rounded in the definition. Number 3, a familiar or usual setting, a habitat. Number 4, a place of origin. Maybe home is our culture. Maybe it's Judaism as being home, right? Number 5 is an establishment providing residence and care for people with special needs. And number 6 is the objective of various games, home plate. So the definition of home goes in many directions. And by the way, the definitions carry on in the adverb category. This is just the noun definition, just in one dictionary. Well, so nouns and adverbs aside, there's not a singular definition for home, so it has to be more than that. But the definition aside, what is the feeling, or even better, what is the spiritual meaning? Because that's what we're here to talk about. What is the spiritual meaning of home? Home is a place that is welcoming, that is a resting place for your essence, for your presence. It's a place that tends to your innate needs. It's a place where you're completely and truly your most honest and truest self. When you think about yourself being at home, if you close your eyes and think about, where do you find yourself? Do you find yourself in your living room, in your pajamas? Who are you with? What's the location? What's the feeling? What does it feel like, right? So it's a place where you can take a sigh of relief and just exist. Just be, not any version of you other than your truest self, the truest one, the truest, most version of yourself, the most connected and present version of yourself, a place where all of your hats come off, all of the identities disappear. I'm not a mother, I'm not a daughter, I'm not a sister, I'm not a wife, I'm not a business owner. Take it all away. And if that's the definition of home, that means that home could be anywhere. So it's not necessarily a physical space, and it's not just a feeling. It's a state of being, is being home, right? So when it comes to the physical world technically, that Hashem created a physical world, at its core, devoid of spirituality, if you take the spirituality away out of Hashem's creations, out of nature, it's filled with ego. Without spirituality, humans have egos. Nature, devoid of spirituality, is egotistical. Not just humans, by the way, but also rocks, right? If a rock's sole purpose is just to be a rock, and there's no bigger picture and there's no higher purpose, it's just a rock. Like, that's all it is, right? And this goes for trees and plants and animals. And if that's the whole picture, then the biggest goal in the world for any piece of nature is survival. Survival becomes the biggest goal, which is evolution, survival of the fittest. If we're just purely physical beings, then survival is the biggest hurdle of life, right? But obviously that way of thinking is fundamentally flawed and is not our belief, because there is a spiritual element to everything physical. And so all physical beings, whether they're human or they're just a rock, we're not an ends. It's not an ends unto itself. It's not its sole purpose is not just being a physical being, But a physical being is a means to an end, which is the purpose of life. We are created by God for God. And this is not like a secondary idea. First, we're physical and then we become a spiritual being. This is a fundamental belief weaved into the essence of creation itself, that I am not created simply to be a physical being on this planet. There's something much greater at play here. There is a higher purpose from the very start of creation. And so to make our world a home for God, if we're going back to the definition of a home, to make our world and our homes and our hearts and our bodies into a mishkan, into a home for God, then we need to elevate absolutely everything, every single thing in its nature, not as an afterthought, not as let me take this physical thing and turn it into something spiritual. This world, my existence, is not an end unto itself. And so every time we make something physical into spiritual, this is exactly what we're doing. We are creating a mishkan. We take leather and we make it into a tefillin or into a siddur. We take money and it becomes charity. We have relationships, right? We get married and we have holy and elevated relationships that bring us to the most elevated version of our souls. We have children who serve God and continue on the generational tikkunim. We use our brains. Our brains are not just our brains. We're not here to do math or to understand or to simply be intellectual about things. We use our brains in an elevated way for a higher purpose, to study Torah, to be more connected to Hashem. We use our mouth to spread Torah, not just our brains to learn Torah, but our mouth to spread Torah, or maybe to say Tehillim, or maybe to speak kind words, to elevate each other in this world. And all of these very physical things now become innately spiritual. They weren't once a version of them is physical and then we created into being spiritual. They have now transformed themselves. They are now innately spiritual. So when the Mishkan's physical form is discussed so elaborately in the Torah, that the Torah is a place that it spares no words, there's nothing extra, right? But this feels really, really redundant, because it first lists everything as an instruction. This is what you should do. You should go here. You should do this. You should use this color, that material, the other. This is how big it should be. This is how little it should be, right? And then once it says everything again, as we're carrying out the actions, it says, this is what we did. We took this material and that dimension and that thread and that color. It could have simply said, we did exactly as we were told. Like that, it seems like that could have been a better method of telling the story, but obviously it's not redundant. And there's a reason why everything gets repeated. It's not using up 13 chapters of the Torah simply because by way of coincidence. So we know that the Torah is our guide, right? We said this. The Torah is our guide. The Torah is a roadmap for our lives. And this is no different. Here we are once again. This is exactly the roadmap to our life. This is the way that the Mishkan was built, is exactly the prototype of how we build connection, of how we build spiritual beings. This is how we do the work of elevating our physical world into a spiritual existence. And this goes for every single category of that. This goes for us as human beings. This goes for us as collectively, as a nation, as a community, as a family, in every single area of your life, whether it's your job, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your way of moving through this world, right? A huge amount of detail in this prototype is in the construction and in the preparation. Both parts practically repeating themselves. The building itself is done very fast. I actually counted it up. It's very, very quick. The psukim that it says Moshe puts it together. But God gives these instructions, and then we carry it out to a T. And the creating of the vessel is where all of the work lies. And we say it over again. It's not any shorter the second time we say it around. It's in just as much detail as the first time of when we were giving the instructions and when we're carrying it out. because we are not simply following instructions. We're creating. When we are creating the Mishkan, we're creating God's plan. If God needs us to do it, this is our work. This is not something that God could do. If he doesn't need our help to create, he created us. He created this world. But there's something in this that is our job. We have a job here, and this is what it is. Our job is to recreate God's plan. God has a plan for us, and our job is to become hospitable to God's existence, which is purely spiritual, specifically because the language is exactly the same when we're instructed and when we are actually carrying out the actions. What we're doing is we're taking this ideal, this lofty ideal that God lays out for us. He gives us these lofty and detailed and complicated instructions. And we are the ones who take that and put it into reality. And that part is not a part that could be skipped. It has to be said all over again. The creation of is a very important part. It's not something that could be skipped. And we see that's the part that we have to spend time on. And once you become the vessel, everything flows. That part is literally 1, 2, 3. It's what happens in 13 chapters, happens in 13 Pesukim. It's very, very quickly. And the next pasuk right afterwards, the Shekhinah comes and rests on us. It's like the actual putting together of the building happens in a snap of a finger. And by the way, if God desired for our world to be a strictly spiritual world, right? If the goal was just to become fully spiritual beings, then all of this trouble could have been skipped. Maybe we could simply transform into being spiritual beings if the goal was spirituality. But obviously that's not the goal because we're here in physical form. And that's because that's not what Hashem wants. It's particularly this work, elevating and infusing spirituality into every single fiber of our physical beings. Hashem's desires the transformation itself, the process itself, the becoming of. This is what Hashem desires for us to do. This is the journey. This is the journey of becoming. And this is where we spend all of this time in the Torah, in the process, in the work, in the details, in the threads, in all of the nitty-gritties of getting the instructions, doing the actions, and the actualizing the potential, actually putting the building together, which the building does become the resting place for Hashem Shekhinah. But the actualizing the potential is the simplest of parts. The work, all the intention, all of the inner toil that we do, whether it's working through trauma, doing parts work, right? The inside, deep soul level work. This is what Hashem is saying in these parshios. This is what matters to God. He says, this is where I'm with you. Let's talk about it. Let's get into the nitty-gritty details of this and of that. Let's talk about the threads. Let's talk about the shape. Let's talk about the size. Let's talk about the color. Let's talk about who's going to do what, the instruction of it, and then the creation of it. It's such a loving process. As I was reading it, this is what I felt like, wow, this is so gentle and slow and nurturing and loving. It feels so intentional. And if this is the purpose, if this is where we're after Geula and after Mitzrayim, this is where we're led to. This is the state of freedom, is having the gift and the ability to create yourself into a vessel, to create your home into a vessel, to create your life into a vessel. This is the paradise of it all. And it feels so loving and gentle and nurturing and so together, wound up with Hashem himself. It's kind of like when you tell your kid this process of the giving the instructions and then doing it, right? It's like when you're going on vacation and you tell your kid, this is what we're going to do. Let me tell you in the greatest detail that I can. This is what's happening. This is going to happen in the morning. Then we're going to go here. Then we're going to do this. I do this with my kids. I prepare them. It's part of the excitement of getting ready for a trip, right? We tell them what's going to happen. and it's part of the process. It's not a part I ever want to skip of preparing them and telling them and coming up with the plans, right? And then as it's happening, we don't stop talking about it. We're rehashing all of it. As it's happening, we're talking about it. Oh, now we're doing that thing. We're going here and we're going there. And the rehashing part of it, it's not a part that could be skipped. This second part of saying, well, maybe we should have gone a little quicker in the part where we actually were doing the instructions that we were given. No, that's the best part. The best part is it's because the story, it gets better as we experience it. It becomes alive. It becomes a part of us. It now lives inside of us as a lived experience. And we need to talk about it over and over and over again. And then we come home and we make a photo book. And then we always go back and we talk about that time that we went on vacation. We never stop talking about the good things. And if this is at the core of what the purpose of our life is, we have to talk about it in great detail. And so if the purpose of our life is creating the vessel, and that's what this whole story is all about, how do we create the vessel and become the resting place for the Shekhinah? Here, this is the guidebook, all through creating home, creating safety, creating love with gentleness, with ease, creating connection to each other, creating connection to ourselves, creating a world and a home and an existence and being a human being where we exist in our most truest and honest version of ourselves, right? And until we get to that version of ourselves where we are home, we're home in our bodies, we are home one with Hashem in everything that we do, we're not truly in a state of flow. And when we have reached that state and we are in a state of flow and we do feel at home in our body and we feel at home in our relationships with ourselves, with other people, in our communities, in our friendships, in our jobs, in our relationship with Hashem, with our children, with every choice that we make, every place that we go, every present moment in our lives, only then does the Shekhinah rest. That part is very easy and natural. It's almost like it's obvious. Being in a state of flow and the alignment within me and within you is where it all begins. This is where it starts. This is becoming a vessel starts with being in alignment and being in a state of flow. This is the purpose of life, of my life, of your life. It's kind of very complex and simple at the same time. Anything enlightened just is. And the ultimate goal of all of this, the whole purpose of everything that we talked about today is to become a vessel for God's presence and being hospitable, right? Being hospitable to the Shekhinah, becoming one with it, with that part of ourselves. We all have a part of the Shekhinah inside of us, right? And the journey itself that's highlighted over and over and over again is the most important part of it all. That's what we're talking about this week. And the journey, it's not something that ever ends, because the more we lean in, the bigger the vessel becomes. And we build ourselves, we become this vessel. And then once you've elevated into that state of consciousness, into that state of being, and you are in flow, we're not okay just being a little bit at home somewhere, where you go somewhere new and you're like, okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm at home. I'm getting a little bit comfortable, right? There's no such thing as being a little bit at home. It can always get better as time goes on, as a relationship grows, as you get more comfortable in any of the categories, in any of the aspects of any of his life, right? But if we're talking about a home, once the home is built, we're not finished. Now we can decorate. And every once in a while, it's time for some new furniture. Maybe we decorated at one point and now we're ready for a new furniture. Maybe we're ready for a new kitchen. Maybe we eventually finish the basement. And every once in a while longer, maybe we entirely move. Maybe we start fresh in an entirely new home, in an entirely new space. And it's never a bad time for building. It's never a bad time for expanding. It's never a bad time for decorating. And obviously in a spiritual sense, right? It's never too late. And it's never a bad time. You're never too old. You're never too lost. You're never too disconnected. You're never too far gone to start building or to continue building or to carry on this mission in the purpose of our life. May we all be our own greatest and biggest and most elaborate vessels for ourselves, for our families, and obviously, most importantly, for God. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for learning Parsha with me. Have a beautiful Shabbos. I'm fascinated over and over again how it's possible that we're still talking about the Mishkan and we're still learning new lessons. And by the way, this parsha is sometimes like Vayakol Pekudei sometimes together. Those lessons together last week and this week is a whole thing on in itself. And when it's separate, it's a whole different thing on in itself. It's like crazy. Every week there's just like something that feels so fundamental over and over and over again.